There's something humbling about standing beneath the towering stones of an ancient monument, knowing it was built not with modern machinery, but with sheer ingenuity and an intimate understanding of the natural world. Think about it. How did civilizations thousands of years ago, without blueprints or calculators, construct wonders that still baffle engineers today? The answer lies in their extraordinary ability to listen to nature's whispers and harness its power in ways we're only beginning to fully appreciate. From the pyramids aligning perfectly with celestial movements to aqueducts that defied gravity, these weren't just feats of strength. They were masterclasses in working with the earth, not against it. Take a moment to picture the bustling streets of ancient Rome, where water flowed effortlessly into fountains and baths thanks to a network of channels so precise they put some modern systems to shame. Or the windcatchers of Persia, towering structures that cooled entire buildings without a single watt of electricity. These weren't accidents or lucky guesses. They were the result of generations observing, experimenting, and perfecting their relationship with the elements. And here's the most thrilling part. Many of these techniques were so advanced, we're still uncovering their secrets buried in ruins, scrolls, and carvings left behind. This isn't just a story about the past, it's a revelation about human potential. What if the key to solving some of today's challenges, sustainable energy, water scarcity, even architecture, has been hiding in plain sight for centuries? As we journey through the innovations of the Egyptians, Mayans, and other trailblazers, you'll see how their wisdom wasn't lost, it was simply waiting for us to rediscover it. So let's step into their world where every gust of wind, ray of sunlight, and drop of water held the promise of something extraordinary. The question isn't just how they did it, it's what we can still learn from them. Water wasn't just a resource to ancient civilizations, it was a force to be revered, a puzzle to be solved, and above all, a testament to human ingenuity. Picture the Nabateans carving their rose-red city of Petra into cliffs so sheer, it seems impossible they could have channeled water through them. Yet hidden within those rocks lay an intricate network of channels and cisterns, designed to capture every precious drop of rainfall in a land where water was scarcer than gold. They didn't just survive the desert, they thrived in it, turning barren rock into a bustling oasis by mastering the art of redirecting flash floods and storing water with near-perfect precision. Then there were the Romans, whose aqueducts snaked across mountains and valleys, defying gravity to bring fresh water to cities miles away. These weren't just pipes, they were feats of mathematics and artistry, built with gradients so exact, water flowed at just the right speed to prevent stagnation or erosion. And in the jungles of the Maya, where droughts could last for years, massive reservoirs lined with limestone plaster held enough water to sustain entire cities, their engineers anticipating dry seasons decades in advance. What's truly fascinating is how these systems blurred the line between practicality and spirituality. The stepwells of India, for example, weren't just storage pits, they were temples, their staircases descending into the earth like invitations to the divine. Water was a gift from the gods, and managing it was a sacred duty. Ancient engineers didn't just study rainfall patterns, they tracked celestial movements, believing the stars themselves held secrets to predicting floods and droughts. The brilliance of these systems wasn't just in their construction, but in their adaptability. When the climate shifted or populations grew, civilizations didn't abandon their cities, they re-engineered them. The Maya expanded reservoirs, the Nabateans dug deeper channels, and the Romans built newer, taller aqueducts. They worked with nature's rhythms, not against them, turning constraints into opportunities. Today, as modern cities grapple with water scarcity, there's a growing recognition that these ancient solutions might hold the key to sustainable living. Some of their techniques, like passive filtration using sand and gravel, are being rediscovered and adapted for modern use. It's a powerful reminder that innovation isn't always about inventing something new. Sometimes it's about revisiting the wisdom of those who came before us, who saw water not just as a commodity, but as a partner in shaping civilization. The wind has always been more than just air in motion. It was a silent collaborator, a force ancient civilizations learned to harness with breathtaking creativity. Take the towering windcatchers of Persia, structures that rose like sentinels above the rooftops of cities like Yazd. These weren't just decorative towers, they were early air conditioning systems, designed with precise angles to catch even the faintest breeze and funnel it downward into homes and storage rooms below. The clever part, they worked without a single moving component. By positioning openings against prevailing winds and using internal shafts to create pressure differences, they could pull hot air up and out while drawing cool air inward, turning scorching desert afternoons into bearable retreats. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Polynesian voyagers were mastering the wind in an entirely different way. With no compasses or maps, they navigated vast ocean stretches by reading the language of the trade winds and currents. Their double-hulled canoes, equipped with triangular sails woven from pandanus leaves, could tack against the wind with precision, allowing them to settle islands scattered across thousands of miles of open Pacific. What's astonishing is how deeply they understood wind patterns, not just as a means of propulsion, but as a seasonal roadmap. They memorized the subtle shifts in wind direction that signaled the approach of distant land, turning breezes into guides. Then there were the ancient Greeks who took wind innovation a step further. On the island of Andros, archaeologists uncovered remnants of the earliest known windmills, built not for sailing but for grinding grain. These vertical axis designs, powered by the relentless Meltemi winds, turned rotational energy into practical labor, freeing communities from reliance on human or animal power. It's a reminder that wind wasn't just about comfort or travel, it was an economic engine, shaping daily life in ways we rarely appreciate today. What ties these civilizations together isn't just their technical skill, but their philosophy. They didn't try to dominate the wind, they adapted to it. Persian architects oriented entire cities around wind patterns, Polynesian navigators planned voyages around seasonal gusts, and Greek engineers built mills where winds were most consistent. They worked with nature's rhythms, not against them, a stark contrast to modern approaches that often treat wind as a resource to be extracted rather than a partner to be understood. Now imagine applying that same mindset today. Modern wind turbines are engineering marvels, but what if we combined their efficiency with ancient wisdom? Some architects are already reviving windcatcher principles for passive cooling in skyscrapers, while sailors study Polynesian navigation techniques to reduce fuel dependence. The real lesson here isn't about replicating old designs. It's about rediscovering that deep, intuitive relationship with the natural world. After all, the wind hasn't changed. Perhaps it's our perspective that needs to shift. The pyramids of Giza don't just dominate the desert skyline, they whisper secrets of the stars. When viewed from above, their precise alignment with Orion's belt isn't a coincidence. It's a deliberate mirror of the heavens, a celestial map etched in stone. This same reverence for cosmic patterns echoes halfway across the world at Machu Picchu, where the Intihuatana stone stands as a silent witness to the sun's journey. At high noon during the equinox, this carved granite pillar casts no shadow at all, a phenomenon so precise it could only be the work of master astronomers who understood the sun's path down to the minute. These structures weren't just monuments, they were living calendars, built to track time on a scale we'd struggle to replicate even with modern tools. The Egyptians didn't need smartphones to know when the Nile would flood. They had the Great Pyramid shafts aligned to specific stars that signaled the annual inundation. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats doubled as observation platforms, where priests tracked Venus's movements to predict planting seasons. And at Chichen Itza, the Mayans designed El Castillo so that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, sunlight slithers down the steps like a serpent, a dazzling display of light and shadow that marked the turning of the agricultural year. What's truly remarkable is how these civilizations, separated by oceans and centuries, arrived at the same profound realization: architecture could be a bridge between earth and sky. The Angkor Wat temple complex in Cambodia, for instance, was positioned so that during the spring equinox, the sun rises directly over its central tower, a spectacle that draws thousands even today. Meanwhile, at Newgrange in Ireland, a narrow passageway floods with sunlight for just 17 minutes at dawn on the winter solstice, illuminating a chamber built 5,000 years ago. This wasn't just about practicality, it was a spiritual dialogue with the cosmos. The ancients saw the sun not as a distant ball of gas, but as a divine force that governed life itself. Their temples weren't merely buildings, they were instruments of communion, designed to capture moments when the boundaries between the human and the celestial seemed to thin. The precision of their alignment suggests something even more extraordinary: generations of patient observation, with knowledge passed down so faithfully that errors measured in fractions of a degree. Today, as we rely on satellites and atomic clocks, there's a quiet irony in realizing how much we've outsourced our connection to the skies. Yet in places like Giza or Machu Picchu, the stones still speak, if we're willing to listen. Modern researchers are only beginning to decode the full complexity of these solar alignments, some of which may hold clues to lost astronomical knowledge. Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't just in how they built these wonders, but in why, to remind us that we're part of a vast, rhythmic universe, one that ancient eyes understood far better than we often give them credit for. Beneath the cobblestone streets of ancient Roman cities ran a secret that powered an empire's relaxation, Earth's own fiery breath. At places like Bath in England, engineers didn't just stumble upon hot springs, they transformed them into grand social hubs where politics, medicine, and daily life converged. The steaming waters of the Great Bath, heated naturally to over 45 degrees Celsius, were channeled through lead pipes, an innovation that turned geothermal energy into a public utility. But what's truly remarkable isn't just the engineering, it's the philosophy behind it. The Romans saw these springs as gifts from the goddess Sulis, blending practical use with spiritual reverence. They didn't just extract heat, they celebrated it, building ornate temples beside the baths where pilgrims came seeking both physical healing and divine favor. Half a world away, Japan's onsen culture took this relationship even deeper. For over 1,000 years, villages like Beppu have thrived around bubbling pools, where minerals like sulfur and iron turned the water into natural remedies. Samurai soaked in these waters to heal battle wounds, while farmers relied on them to soothe aching muscles after long days in rice fields. The genius lay in their sustainability. Onsen were carefully managed to prevent overuse, with rules etched into wooden plaques about water temperatures and soaking times. Some springs were reserved for cooking, others for dyeing fabrics, proving geothermal energy wasn't just about warmth, it was woven into every aspect of life. What united these cultures was their intuitive grasp of balance. The Romans used hypocaust systems to distribute heat from springs to nearby buildings, while Japanese inns built sliding doors to regulate steam flow naturally. Neither had thermostats or pumps, yet both achieved perfect harmony between human need and geological reality. Modern Icelanders, who heat 90% of their homes geothermally, are rediscovering this wisdom, but with one key difference. Where ancient societies treated hot springs as living entities requiring respect, we often see them as industrial resources. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson hidden in the steam. At Yellowstone, indigenous tribes like the Shoshone considered geysers sacred, attributing their power to underground spirits. Their rituals offering prayers before collecting heat reflected an understanding that energy wasn't just physical, it was relational. Today, as engineers drill deeper for geothermal plants, some are asking whether we've lost that connection. Projects in New Zealand now consult Maori elders about tapping ancestral lands, blending kilowatts with cultural protocols. The brilliance of these ancient systems wasn't just in their technology, it was in their vision. They remind us that true sustainability isn't about dominating nature's forces, but collaborating with them. When you sit in a Roman bath or a Japanese onsen, you're not just soaking in water. You're immersing yourself in a legacy that saw the earth not as a warehouse of resources, but as a partner in survival. And that might be the hottest idea of all. The Aztecs didn't just farm the land, they dreamed it into existence. In the heart of Lake Texcoco, where swampy waters seemed unfit for crops, they engineered floating worlds called chinampas. Picture narrow islands woven from reeds, anchored by willow trees, their roots knitting together like living nets beneath the water's surface. Farmers piled nutrient-rich lake mud onto these rafts, creating soil so fertile it yielded 7 harvests a year: corn, beans, squash, and flowers blooming where open water once rippled. But the real magic wasn't in the construction, it was in the ecosystem they mimicked. By digging canals between each chinampa, they created waterways teeming with fish that fertilized crops naturally, while ducks patrolled for pests. This wasn't agriculture, it was alchemy, turning wetlands into a self-sustaining mosaic that fed 200,000 people at Tenochtitlan's height. High in the Andes, the Incas faced the opposite challenge. Slopes so steep, rain washed soil away in minutes. Their solution, terraces that transformed mountains into staircases of plenty. Each stone-walled step absorbed rainfall like a sponge, while quinoa and potatoes grew at altitudes Europeans thought impossible. The secret lay in their understanding of microclimates, planting cold-resistant varieties at higher elevations, stacking crops vertically to maximize space. But what's often overlooked is how these terraces doubled as climate control. The stones stored daytime heat to protect against frost, and channels diverted meltwater with precision modern hydrologists still admire. At Moray, circular terraces acted as agricultural laboratories, with temperature differences between levels allowing farmers to test crop varieties across simulated climates. These systems shared a profound philosophy: work with the land's logic, not against it. The Aztecs didn't drain their lake, they expanded its productivity. The Incas didn't flatten mountains, they sculpted them into productive art. Neither used plows that churned soil into exhaustion instead. They practiced no-till methods that preserved microbes and organic matter, techniques now championed by sustainable farmers. Their pest control came from biodiversity, with marigolds and herbs planted between rows to repel insects naturally. Today, as industrial agriculture grapples with depleted soils and chemical runoff, these ancient methods are experiencing a quiet renaissance. In Mexico City, chinampa-inspired aquaponics systems grow vegetables atop urban canals, while Andean farmers relearn terrace techniques to combat climate-induced landslides. Scientists have discovered that Inca terraces increase biodiversity by creating habitat, islands, just as Aztec canals did centuries ago. The lesson isn't about recreating the past, it's about rediscovering a mindset. These civilizations didn't see land as something to dominate, but as a living partner in the dance of survival. Their greatest innovation wasn't the terraces or floating gardens themselves, but the humility to observe nature's patterns and the creativity to amplify them. Long before the hum of engines filled the air, the rhythmic footsteps of oxen marked the pulse of civilization. These powerful creatures didn't just pull plows, they turned untamed earth into fertile fields, their steady strength harnessed by farmers from Mesopotamia to the Mississippi. But animals weren't merely living machines, they were collaborators in humanity's greatest projects. The Indus Valley's elephants, for instance, didn't just haul stones for temples, they were trained to place them with precision, their sensitive trunks adjusting boulders too heavy for human hands. This wasn't brute force, it was a delicate partnership where humans learned to communicate with another species to achieve what neither could alone. Consider the Silk Road, where caravans of Bactrian camels carried treasures across continents. Their ability to traverse deserts without water for days made them irreplaceable, their wide feet distributing weight to prevent soil erosion, a natural sustainability modern trucks struggle to replicate. Even pigeons played their part, their homing instincts turning them into feathery couriers that delivered vital messages across battlefields and kingdoms. The Greeks used them to announce Olympic victories, while Genghis Khan's empire relied on them for military coordination across vast distances. These animals weren't just performing tasks, they were extending human capability in ways technology couldn't yet match. What set these relationships apart was their reciprocity. Oxen weren't worked to exhaustion, they were rested, fed, and even revered in cultures like ancient Egypt, where the Apis bull was considered divine. Mongol horsemen studied their steeds' grazing patterns, moving camps to ensure fresh pastures. This wasn't just pragmatism, it was a recognition that animals thrived when treated as allies, not appliances. Unlike today's fossil-fueled machinery that depletes resources, animal labor often enriched the land. Draft animals fertilized fields as they worked, their manure nourishing the soil in a closed-loop system modern agriculture is only now rediscovering. The environmental benefits were profound. Elephants in Sri Lanka's forests created pathways that doubled as fire breaks, while their browsing habits shaped ecosystems without destroying them. Compare that to modern bulldozers which strip landscapes bare. Even shepherding dogs in the Scottish Highlands prevented overgrazing by guiding flocks with precision no fence could match. These weren't just tools, they were living, breathing components of a balanced system. Today, as we grapple with the consequences of industrialization, there's a quiet movement reviving these ancient partnerships. Vineyards in France are returning to horse-drawn plows to avoid soil compaction, while permaculture farms employ geese for pest control instead of pesticides. The lesson isn't about abandoning technology, but remembering that progress doesn't always mean replacing nature. Sometimes it means collaborating with it. After all, the original renewable energy wasn't wind or solar. It was the heartbeat of creatures who walked beside us, turning shared labor into mutual survival. The towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia weren't just religious monuments, they were masterclasses in thermal engineering. Built from sun-baked adobe bricks, their massive walls absorbed heat during scorching afternoons like sponges, then slowly released warmth during chilly desert nights. This wasn't accidental, it was physics harnessed through material choice. The same principle shaped Yemen's ancient mud skyscrapers in Shibam, where 16-story towers featured strategically placed windows that created natural air currents. Cooler ground-level air would rise through the buildings as hot air escaped from upper vents, turning entire structures into passive climate systems without a single watt of electricity. Halfway across the world, the ancestral pueblones of Choco Canyon demonstrated similar ingenuity. Their great houses faced south to capture low winter sunlight that warmed stone floors, while wide eaves blocked high summer rays. Underground kivas stayed cool year-round thanks to their earth-sheltered design, a technique still used in modern earthships. What these cultures shared was an intimate knowledge of their local environments. They didn't fight the climate, they listened to it, using materials at hand to create comfort. Adobe wasn't just cheap and abundant, its high thermal mass stabilized indoor temperatures naturally. Modern architects are now waking up to these ancient secrets. In New Mexico, contemporary adobe homes require 80% less energy for heating and cooling than conventional houses. The Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe mimics termite mounds ventilation systems using concrete lungs that regulate temperature passively. Even skyscrapers are borrowing from Yemen's playbook. The Pearl River Tower in Guangzhou angles its facade to channel winds through turbines while shading interiors. The brilliance lies in simplicity. Before glass curtain walls demanded constant air conditioning, builders worked with nature's rhythms. Persian windcatchers cooled buildings by directing breezes over underground Qanat water channels. Greek houses oriented courtyards to create shade while allowing winter sun. Roman villas used water features to humidify dry air. These weren't just design choices, they were survival strategies refined over generations. Today's push toward sustainable architecture feels less like innovation and more like homecoming. As we replace energy-guzzling systems with passive solar design and natural ventilation, we're not inventing solutions, we're remembering them. The next time you feel a cool breeze in a shaded courtyard or notice how thick walls mute outside heat, you're experiencing the same wisdom that kept civilizations comfortable for millennia. Only now we're finally smart enough to recognize it. Fire was never just a spark in the dark. It was humanity's first collaborator in shaping civilization. In ancient China, the roar of bronze casting furnaces echoed through the Shang dynasty, where artisans mastered temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius to create ritual vessels and weapons. But this wasn't mere metallurgy, it was alchemy. By layering charcoal and ore in precise ratios, they achieved consistent heat distribution, a technique so advanced modern engineers still study their furnace designs. The secret wasn't just in controlling flames, it was in honoring them. Before each pour, priests performed ceremonies to appease the fire spirit Yanhuang, believing the metal's quality depended as much on spiritual harmony as technical skill. Across the Pacific, Native American tribes like the Yurok and Karok practiced a different kind of fire wisdom. Their seasonal controlled burns cleared underbrush without harming mature trees, creating open forests where elk and deer thrived. These weren't random fires, they followed lunar cycles and plant growth stages, timed so flames would be gentle enough for seedlings to survive. The result: ecosystems resistant to catastrophic wildfires, with soil enriched by ash and meadows bursting with medicinal herbs. Oral traditions passed down for generations describe fire as a grandfather, a teacher that demanded respect but rewarded careful stewardship with abundance. What linked these cultures was their understanding of fire's duality. In China's Henan province, archaeologists found furnaces positioned to harness prevailing winds, reducing fuel use while minimizing smoke. Meanwhile, California's indigenous peoples used fire to cultivate basketry materials like hazel, whose stems grew straighter and more flexible after controlled burns. Both recognized that fire could devastate or nourish. The difference lay in intention and restraint. This reverence acted as an invisible safeguard against ecological collapse. Where industrial societies see fire as an enemy to suppress, these traditions treated it as a partner to guide. When European settlers banned indigenous burning practices in the 19th century, they unknowingly set the stage for the catastrophic wildfires we face today. Now, forest managers are relearning what ancient cultures never forgot, that regular, low-intensity fires prevent the fuel buildup that turns landscapes into tinderboxes. The spiritual dimension deepened this balance. Chinese foundry workers made offerings to fire gods before smelting, believing pure metals required cosmic alignment. Native American firekeepers sang prayers while setting blazes, viewing flames as messengers carrying requests to the spirit world. This wasn't superstition, it was a psychological break, embedding caution into cultural memory. When fire is sacred, you don't wield it carelessly. Today, as megafires rage from Australia to the Amazon, the old ways whisper solutions. Prescribed burning programs now mimic indigenous techniques, while clean energy researchers study Shang furnace designs for inspiration in efficient combustion. The greatest lesson isn't about controlling fire, it's about rebuilding our relationship with it. These civilizations didn't conquer flames, they conversed with them, listening for the line between creation and destruction. Perhaps it's time we relearned that language. Venice didn't fight the tides, it danced with them. Imagine driving thousands of oak trunks through soft silt until they hit solid clay, then building a marble city atop this submerged forest. The Venetians knew something modern engineers are only now appreciating. Saltwater preserves wood by preventing rot causing oxygen from penetrating. Those 12th century pilings still support palaces today because their builders understood the Adriatic's rhythms better than their own breath. They positioned canals to harness tidal flows that flushed waste seaward twice daily, turning what should have been a mosquito-ridden swamp into a self-cleaning marvel. Even their mortar was mixed with seawater, becoming harder over centuries as salt crystals reinforced the bonds. Across the Pacific, Hawaiians engineered tidal fish ponds so sophisticated they'd put today's aquaculture to shame. These loco kuapa weren't just stone walls, they were precision instruments. Gaps in the barriers allowed small fish to enter at high tide, then trapped them as waters receded, while sluice gates filtered out predators. The real genius, these ponds produced up to 5 times more seafood per acre than open fishing, all while maintaining wild stocks. Some ponds operated for 800 years without depletion, their caretakers adjusting gate heights based on moon phases to optimize flow. What united these cultures was their refusal to see the ocean as an obstacle. When Dutch engineers built dikes to hold back the sea, Venetians built foundations that floated with it. Where industrial fisheries scoop entire ecosystems from the water, Hawaiians created systems that harvested abundance while nurturing it. Both approaches reveal a profound truth. Coastal survival isn't about conquering nature's power, it's about aligning with its logic. Modern projects are finally catching up. Rotterdam's floating neighborhoods adapt to rising seas like Venetian palazzos, while engineers study Hawaiian fish ponds to design sustainable shrimp farms. The lesson isn't in the specific techniques, but in the mindset. These ancient builders didn't ask how to stop the tides, they asked how the tides could work for them. As sea levels rise today, that shift in perspective might be our greatest hope. High above the jungle canopy, the steps of El Castillo at Chichen Itza don't just climb toward the sky, they sing. Clap your hands at the base of this Mayan pyramid, and the echo doesn't just bounce back. It transforms into the chirp of the sacred Quetzal bird, a phenomenon so precise it feels like magic. But this was no accident. The pyramid's steep limestone steps act like a sound filter, breaking echoes into frequencies that mimic nature's own music. For the Maya, sound wasn't just physics, it was a bridge to the divine, an invisible force woven into rituals where chants to the rain god Chok rolled across plazas with unnatural clarity, amplified by precisely angled walls that functioned as ancient megaphones. Half a world away, the Greeks were mastering acoustics on an equally breathtaking scale. At Epidaurus, a theater carved into a Peloponnese hillside carries whispers from the stage to the topmost row, 55 meters away, without a single microphone. The secret lies in the limestone seats, their porous texture filtering out low-frequency background noise while amplifying higher vocal frequencies. But what's truly remarkable is how they calibrated this. Each row's height and curvature were calculated to create constructive interference, where sound waves reinforce rather than cancel each other. Even the spacing between seats played a role, with gaps acting as sound traps to reduce echo. This wasn't just engineering, it was auditory alchemy, turning stone into a resonant instrument. These cultures shared a revelation we're only rediscovering now: sound shapes human connection. In Malta's Hypogeum, a subterranean temple carved 3,000 years before the pyramids, voices chanting at certain frequencies caused the entire chamber to vibrate, creating bone-deep resonance that early worshippers described as the gods speaking through stone. Recent studies suggest these infrasound frequencies can alter brainwave patterns, inducing trance-like states, an effect possibly harnessed in rituals. Meanwhile, in Turkey, the underground city of Derinkuyu used whispering galleries to relay messages across 9 levels, with curved tunnels acting as ancient intercoms. The genius of these designs lies in their multidimensional thinking. Mayan ball courts weren't just sporting arenas. Their parallel walls created flutter echoes that made ritual games sound like thunderstorms, heightening drama. Greek theaters often placed reflective materials beneath the stage to boost actors' projection, while Roman amphitheaters positioned bronze vases in cavities to tune reverberation. They didn't just build for the eye, they composed for the ear, understanding that sound could command attention, evoke emotion, and even alter consciousness. Today, as concert halls struggle with electronic amplification and cities drown in noise pollution, these ancient techniques are finding new life. Architects study Epidaurus to design spaces where speakers can be heard naturally, while archaeologists collaborate with acousticians to decode how sacred frequencies were used therapeutically. The deeper lesson isn't about replicating old blueprints, it's about recognizing that our ancestors didn't just hear the world. They listened to it, discerning patterns we've forgotten in the age of earbuds and echo chambers. When a modern singer's voice carries effortlessly across a room without speakers, or a whispered prayer seems to hang in the air of an old cathedral, we're not just witnessing clever design. We're hearing echoes of a time when sound wasn't background, it was the very fabric of experience. Ancient warriors understood nature's arsenal long before laboratories existed, turning venom, pollen, and even insects into weapons with chilling precision. Picture Roman soldiers catapulting clay pots stuffed with angry bees into enemy fortifications, their airborne stings creating chaos more effectively than swords. Or Amazonian hunters dipping darts in curare, a muscle-paralyzing poison extracted from vines that could drop a jaguar mid-leap. These weren't random acts of cruelty. They were calculated applications of ecological knowledge, where understanding an animal's behavior or a plant's biochemistry meant the difference between victory and defeat. The sophistication of these methods often goes unnoticed. Scythian archers, for example, didn't just poison arrows. They fermented venom from steppe vipers, creating a cocktail that caused paralysis and internal bleeding. Greek armies tainted water supplies with toxic hellebore roots, inducing debilitating cramps in besieged cities. What's startling is how these techniques mirrored modern principles of chemical warfare, yet relied entirely on nature's own designs. The Assyrians even weaponized ergot fungus, a mold that grows on rye, which when ingested could trigger hallucinations or gangrene. But here's the paradox: these same cultures also revered the sources of their poisons as sacred. Indigenous tribes in the Amazon treated cure-producing plants as spiritual allies, performing rituals before harvesting them. The ancient Greeks associated hellebore with the healing god Asclepius, using tiny doses medicinally. This duality forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: the line between medicine and weaponry, between reverence and exploitation, has always been thin. Today, as scientists study snake venom for heart medications or bee toxins for anti-inflammatory drugs, we're circling back to this ancient wisdom: the difference. Where past civilizations saw nature as a teacher to be respected, modern warfare often treats it as a resource to be mined. Perhaps that's the real lesson hidden in these toxic tactics. Innovation doesn't have to mean domination. When we listen to nature instead of just leveraging it, even the deadliest secrets can become tools for life. The ancient Egyptians didn't just wear linen, they perfected it to near translucence, turning flax fibers into fabric so fine it was described as woven air. Harvesting this plant was an art in itself. Workers would uproot flax just as its stems turned golden, timing the harvest to when fibers were strongest yet most pliable. Then came the retting process, where bundles soaked in Nile water until bacteria loosened the plant's glue like pectins. This natural decomposition, carefully monitored to avoid over-rotting, produced fibers that could be spun into threads finer than modern cotton. The result: linen so breathable it kept wearers cool in blistering desert heat, yet durable enough to last centuries. Tutankhamun's wrappings remain intact after 3,300 years. High in the Andes, where temperatures swung from scorching days to freezing nights, the Inca developed textiles as sophisticated as their stonework. Alpaca and vicuña wool wasn't just spun, it was engineered. By blending fibers from different animals, they created fabrics with customizable properties. Vicuña wool, softer than cashmere, formed inner layers for warmth, while coarser llama hair made sturdy outer garments. But the real innovation lay in their spinning technique. Using drop spindles weighted with ceramic walls, they could produce yarns of varying thicknesses, some tightly plied for waterproof ponchos, others loosely spun for breathable tunics. These weren't just clothes, they were climate control systems woven from the land itself. Color transformed these textiles into storytelling canvases. In Mesoamerica, the cochineal beetle became more precious than gold. It took 70,000 crushed female insects to produce 1 pound of vibrant crimson dye, a pigment so stable it still tints fabrics today. The Phoenicians discovered how murex sea snails secreted a purple so rare it became synonymous with royalty, while the Celts extracted vivid blues from woad leaves through a fermentation process that unlocked indigo's brilliance. These dyers didn't just apply color, they orchestrated chemical reactions. Iron-rich mud could shift a yellow dye to deep olive, while urine collected in vats at dye workshops acted as a mordant to bond pigments to fibers. What's startling is how these methods aligned with ecological cycles. The Inca sheared alpacas during the dry season when wool was strongest, while Egyptian flax rotated with food crops to prevent soil depletion. Compare that to modern textile production, where cotton farming consumes 25% of the world's pesticides, and synthetic dyes pollute waterways with heavy metals. Ancient weavers worked within nature's limits, creating beauty without waste, a philosophy embodied by Japan's Baroque patchwork, where generations repaired and reinforced garments until scraps became heirlooms. Today, as fashion giants scramble to adopt sustainable practices, they're ironically turning to these ancient solutions. Plant-based dyes are making a comeback in high-end studios, while alpaca wool is prized for its low environmental impact. But perhaps the most valuable lesson isn't about techniques, it's about mindset. These civilizations didn't see textiles as disposable commodities, but as extensions of the living world. When an Andean weaver spun wool, she wasn't just making fabric, she was continuing a dialogue between human hands and animal coats, between plant pigments and loom rhythms. In their threads, we find a blueprint for harmony, one stitch at a time. Long before pharmacies lined city streets, healers turned to the earth's own medicine cabinet where roots, leaves, and bark held remedies refined over millennia. In India's Ayurvedic tradition, turmeric wasn't just a spice. Its golden powder was a master healer, used to reduce inflammation and purify blood, with modern science now confirming its curcumin compound fights everything from arthritis to Alzheimer's. Meanwhile, in China, ginseng roots were harvested with ceremony, their forked shapes resembling human figures, a sign, practitioners believed, of their affinity for balancing the body's vital energy, or chi. Greek physicians like Dioscorides catalogued hundreds of plants in his 1st century text De Materia Medica, where willow bark, nature's aspirin, was prescribed for pain relief, its salicin content later inspiring the synthetic drugs we use today. These systems shared a radical idea. Illness wasn't just an isolated malfunction, but a disruption in the dialogue between body and environment. Ayurveda's 3 doshas vata, pitta, kapha, mirrored the elements of air, fire, and earth, with treatments tailored to restore equilibrium. A fever wasn't merely suppressed. Cooling herbs like coriander and sandalwood addressed the excess fire at its root. Traditional Chinese medicine mapped the body's meridians like rivers, using ginseng to replenish depleted energy or chrysanthemum to clear heat from the liver. Even Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, insisted food should be thy medicine, prescribing garlic for parasites and mint for digestion, practices validated by contemporary research on their antimicrobial properties. The precision of these remedies astonishes modern researchers. Amazonian shamans identified the cinchona tree's bark as a malaria treatment centuries before quinine was isolated, while Egyptian papyri detail honey's use in wound care, a practice now explained by its hydrogen peroxide content. But perhaps the most profound difference was their approach to sourcing. Herbs were gathered at specific lunar phases or seasons, believed to peak in potency. Turmeric harvested after monsoons, ginseng roots aged for decades. These weren't superstitions, but observations of nature's rhythms. Today, as antibiotic resistance rises and chronic illnesses proliferate, integrative medicine is bridging ancient wisdom with modern rigor. Clinical trials validate ginger's nausea-relieving effects, once dismissed as folklore, while yoga, Ayurveda's sister science, is prescribed for anxiety and hypertension. Pharmaceutical companies now bioprospect in rainforests, seeking next-generation drugs from plants indigenous peoples have used for generations. Yet the real lesson isn't about extracting single compounds, it's about rediscovering that holistic vision where health isn't a battle against nature, but a partnership with it. When a doctor prescribes forest bathing for stress or a nutritionist recommends fermented foods for gut health, they're echoing a truth these ancient healers knew all along. The earth doesn't just hold cures, it holds conversations if we're willing to listen. Polynesian navigators could feel their way across an ocean wider than continents, not with instruments, but with their bodies. Kneeling in the hull of a double-hulled waikolua, they'd detect subtle shifts in swell patterns through the canoe's vibrations, reading the Pacific like a pulsating map. Each island chain created its own unique wave fingerprint. The reflected waves from Tahiti's volcanic peaks, for example, produced a distinct crosshatch pattern that master navigators like Mau could recognize days before land was visible. They didn't just follow stars, they danced with them, memorizing the rising and setting points of over 250 celestial bodies to maintain course during multi-month voyages. The real brilliance lay in their mental star compass, a conceptual map where stars were fixed to specific bearings as they arced across the sky, turning the heavens into a rotating clock face that never lost time. Meanwhile, Viking sailors were cracking nature's code under overcast Nordic skies. Their legendary sunstones, possibly calcite or cordierite crystals, acted as primitive polarizing filters. By rotating these stones until light patterns aligned, they could pinpoint the sun's position even through dense fog, a trick modern researchers confirmed works with 95% accuracy. But their true navigational genius was more visceral. They watched for looming, a refractive phenomenon where distant coastlines appeared to rise above the horizon like mirages, and tracked the flight paths of seabirds returning to nesting grounds. A raven released from the mast would fly straight toward land if it was near, a technique so reliable that Norse sagas described Leif Erikson carrying caged ravens aboard his ship specifically for this purpose. What united these cultures was their multisensory approach to wayfinding. Polynesians tasted ocean salinity to detect freshwater plumes from unseen islands, while Vikings noted changes in wave noise when approaching fjords. Both developed intricate oral traditions to preserve knowledge without written records. The Polynesian kahuna schools trained navigators through chants describing star paths, and Viking Leithasjana poems encoded sailing directions in verse. This wasn't just navigation, it was an ongoing conversation with the environment, where every ripple, bird call, and cloud formation carried meaning. Modern technology has ironically made us less attuned to these natural signals. GPS fails when satellites malfunction, but the Polynesian star compass works as long as the sky exists. Some Pacific nations are now reviving these techniques to reduce dependence on vulnerable electronic systems, while oceanographers study Viking wave reading methods to understand pre-industrial climate patterns. The deepest lesson here isn't about replicating ancient tools, it's about recovering that immersive awareness, the kind of attention that turns whispers of wind into guiding voices. These navigators didn't conquer the sea, they learned its language and in doing so made the vast and trackless intimately knowable. Mohenjo-Daro didn't just rise from the Indus Valley, it flowed with it. This 5,000-year-old metropolis wasn't laid out in rigid blocks but followed the land's natural contours, its streets angling slightly to accommodate seasonal water channels. Beneath those baked brick roads ran an underground drainage system so advanced it put some modern cities to shame. Each home connected to covered gutters that funneled wastewater away from living spaces, while manholes allowed for regular cleaning, a sanitation standard Europe wouldn't match for another 4 millennia. But what's truly remarkable isn't just the engineering, it's the philosophy. The city's planners didn't see rivers as obstacles to be bridged or swamps as nuisances to be drained. They designed neighborhoods around existing waterways, turning potential flood zones into thriving commercial docks where merchants unloaded goods directly from boats onto stepped platforms. Half a world away, Anchor's engineers faced the opposite challenge: too much water, not too little. Their solution: a hydraulic empire where reservoirs the size of lakes doubled as flood control systems. The West Barre, stretching 8 kilometers long, wasn't just a static pool, it was a living part of the city's metabolism. During monsoons, it absorbed excess runoff, preventing the Mekong Delta from swallowing temples. In dry seasons, its sluice gates released water through clay pipes to irrigate rice paddies that fed 1 million people. Like Mohenjo-Daro's drains, these weren't afterthoughts tacked onto finished cities. They were the blueprint itself. Roads radiated from reservoirs like spokes, and temple moats served as emergency water storage, blending spirituality with pragmatism. These civilizations shared a radical idea: cities shouldn't conquer nature, they should collaborate with it. When Roman engineers leveled hills to build straight roads, Anca's planners elevated causeways over floodplains, letting water flow beneath. Where modern developers often bury creeks in concrete tubes, Mohenjo-Daro's architects celebrated their waterways with public bathing platforms and ornamental wells. Even waste was part of the cycle. Indus Valley households separate solid refuse into brick-lined bins, suggesting early composting practices. Today's urban planners are finally catching up. Singapore's ABC Waters program revives ancient concepts, transforming canals into vegetated bioswales that slow stormwater while creating parkland. Copenhagen's floodable parks absorb rainwater like Anca's barrays, turning climate threats into amenities. The lesson isn't about copying old blueprints, it's about adopting that same humility. These ancient cities thrived because their builders asked not, "How can we force this landscape to fit our vision?" but, "What does this land want to be?" When we listen that closely, even swamps and monsoons become allies in building civilizations that last. On the emerald terraces of Bali, water doesn't just flow, it dances to the rhythm of prayers. The Subak system, a 1,000-year-old network of canals and rice paddies, isn't governed by engineers or politicians, but by priests. At its heart lies a revelation: ecology and spirituality aren't separate pursuits, they're two currents in the same river. Every planting season, farmers gather at water temples like Pura Ulan Donu, where offerings of fruit and flowers aren't just symbolic gestures. They're part of a precise hydrological calendar, where festivals mark the opening and closing of sluice gates, synchronizing irrigation with lunar cycles and soil conditions. The result, a self-regulating ecosystem where every villager becomes a steward, not because of laws, but because caring for water is woven into the fabric of their worship. Take the ritual of Melasti, where sacred statues are bathed in lakes to purify them before planting begins. On the surface, it's a religious ceremony, but look deeper, and it's also a masterclass in watershed management. By timing this ritual to coincide with the dry season's end, communities naturally inspect and clean waterways when they're most vulnerable to silt buildup. Similarly, the Tumpek Yuda festival honors trees by wrapping them in ceremonial cloth, a practice that doubles as a reminder to protect the forests that regulate Bali's delicate water balance. These aren't just traditions, they're living systems of knowledge passed down through generations in the language of ritual rather than textbooks. What makes Subak extraordinary is its resilience. While top-down irrigation projects often collapse without enforcement, Bali's system has thrived for centuries because compliance isn't imposed, it's inspired. Farmers who divert too much water don't face fines, they risk spiritual disharmony, a consequence far more potent in a culture where humans, gods, and nature are intertwined. Modern hydrologists studying Subak discovered something astonishing. Its water distribution matches game theory models for optimal resource sharing. The Balinese achieved through shared belief what economists struggle to enforce with contracts, proof that culture can be as precise as mathematics. Today, as climate change disrupts rainfall patterns, Subak offers a provocative question: could spirituality be the missing ingredient in modern conservation? In Japan's Shinto tradition, forests around shrines remain untouched as sacred groves, preserving biodiversity. Indigenous Australians perform fire stick farming ceremonies that prevent wildfires while renewing habitats. These systems share a common thread. They don't just protect nature, they converse with it, treating the land as a participant rather than a passive resource. The challenge isn't to copy these rituals, but to rediscover that sense of reciprocity. When a Balinese farmer offers rice to the water goddess Dui Donu, he's not just asking for blessings, he's acknowledging a debt. That mindset might be more vital than any technology. After all, solar panels and recycling programs fail when people see them as burdens. But what if sustainability felt less like sacrifice and more like sacred duty? Subak doesn't just irrigate fields, it nurtures a world view where every drop of water, every grain of rice, is part of an unbroken circle of giving and receiving. And that's a lesson no engineering manual can teach. The Hittites didn't just discover iron, they courted it from the earth with a patience that bordered on reverence. Picture a mountainside in Anatolia where furnaces glowed like captured sunsets, their bellows stoked by workers who knew the exact moment to introduce charcoal, creating temperatures hot enough to wrest metal from stubborn ore. This wasn't brute force, it was a delicate negotiation. Too little heat, and the iron remained trapped in rock. Too much, and it became brittle. The Hittites' secret lay in their understanding of airflow, designing furnaces with clay tires that funneled oxygen precisely, turning raw hematite into malleable blooms of wrought iron. Their success was so complete that iron became a guarded state secret, its value surpassing gold and its production methods shrouded in rituals so sacred, revealing them was punishable by death. Long before the Hittites, another revolution was brewing in the smelting pits of the Bronze Age. Early metallurgists scouring riverbeds for nuggets of copper noticed something peculiar when certain stones, tin-bearing cassiterite, were tossed into the fire alongside copper. The resulting alloy was harder, sharper, and more lustrous. This wasn't just an accident, it was the birth of materials science. By the time the Sumerians crafted the standard of they weren't just hammering metal, they were orchestrating chemical reactions, blending copper from Cyprus with Afghan tin in ratios so precise, modern engineers marvel at their consistency. What's often overlooked is how deeply these artisans understood their materials. They didn't just mine ore, they read landscapes like recipes. The Minoans of Crete sought copper in specific green-stained cliffs, recognizing malachite's telltale hue as a precursor to metal. In Britain, Bronze Age miners followed color guides, red streaks in rock signaling tin deposits, and dug shafts following natural fault lines, their tunnels mirroring the Earth's own fractures. Even the charcoal they used wasn't arbitrary. Oak burned hotter than pine, and different woods imparted unique properties to the metal, a nuance lost in today's industrial furnaces. The spiritual dimension ran just as deep. In the Caucasus, smiths buried their dead with hammers and anvils, believing metallurgy was a divine gift from gods like the Armenian Tur. Chinese bronzes weren't just cast, they were consecrated, their surfaces etched with Tauti motifs meant to channel ancestral spirits. This wasn't superstition, it was a recognition that transforming earth into tools required more than technical skill. It demanded harmony between human hands and cosmic forces. Modern metallurgy may have replaced charcoal with coke and hand forging with robots, but we're only now grasping the wisdom in these ancient methods. Archaeometallurgists studying Hittite iron find traces of phosphorus that inadvertently strengthened their weapons, while traditional Japanese swordsmiths still use clay slurry quenching techniques unchanged for a millennium. The lesson isn't about recreating old furnaces, it's about remembering that every alloy we take for granted began with someone kneeling in the dirt, listening to the whispers of flame and stone. The art of keeping food from spoiling wasn't invented in stainless steel laboratories. It was perfected by generations of cooks who turned necessity into ingenuity. Picture an Inuit hunter carefully packing raw seabird meat into a freshly harvested sealskin, then burying it under stones for months. What sounds like a recipe for disaster was actually a masterclass in fermentation. The cold Arctic air slowed decomposition while beneficial bacteria worked their magic, transforming the meat into kiviak, a protein-rich delicacy that could last through brutal winters. Meanwhile, under the blazing Mesopotamian sun, figs and dates were laid out on flat rooftops, their sugars concentrating as moisture evaporated, creating natural candy that could sustain travelers across deserts. These methods weren't just about survival, they were about unlocking nature's hidden chemistry. The Egyptians discovered that honey's antibacterial properties could preserve fruits and even mummies, while Nordic fishermen learned that drying cod on wooden racks creating stockfish removed enough moisture to prevent bacterial growth for years. In the Andes, potatoes were freeze-dried into chuño by exposing them to freezing nights and sunny days, a process that removed toxins while making them lightweight for transport. Each technique was tailored to local conditions, turning climate challenges into preservation advantages. What's striking is how these ancient practices align with modern science. Fermentation, used in everything from Korean kimchi to German sauerkraut, promotes probiotics that aid digestion. Smoking meats with hardwoods, a Native American tradition, introduces antimicrobial compounds that slow spoilage. Even clay pots buried in damp soil, an African technique for keeping vegetables crisp, worked by maintaining humidity levels modern refrigerators now replicate with humidity-controlled drawers. The philosophy behind these methods might be their most valuable legacy. Before zero waste became a trend, these cultures viewed preservation as part of a cycle. Nothing was disposable. Roman garum factories recycled fish guts into prized fermented sauce, while Japanese farmers pickled autumn vegetables to enjoy spring's first greens. Today, as chefs rediscover dry aging meats and fermenting vegetables, they're not just reviving old techniques, they're reconnecting with a world where time, temperature, and patience are the most essential ingredients in the kitchen. Long before satellites and fiber optics, the world hummed with connection not through wires, but along dusty trails winding through mountain passes and across deserts. The Silk Road wasn't a single path but a sprawling web of trade routes stretching 12,000 miles, where Persian silver coins jingled alongside Chinese silk bales and Roman glassware. What's astonishing isn't just the distance these goods travel, it's how the system thrived without a single central authority. Caravanserais, fortified inns spaced a day's journey apart, functioned like ancient routers, offering rest, repairs, and fresh camels to merchants. These hubs weren't just pit stops, they were cultural melting pots where Buddhist monks shared scriptures with Nestorian Christians, and Arab mathematicians taught Indian numerals to Persian scholars. The real cargo wasn't just spices and textiles, it was ideas moving at the speed of hoofbeats. Meanwhile, in the Andes, the Incas engineered a road network so efficient, messages could travel 250 miles in a day, faster than the Pony Express. Their Quhapacñan spanned 25,000 miles, with suspension bridges woven from iku grass that swayed over raging rivers. What made these roads revolutionary wasn't their length, but their design. Instead of cutting through mountains, they followed natural contours, using staircases and switchbacks to minimize erosion. Relay runners called chasquis memorized oral messages, sprinting between tambos way stations stocked with freeze-dried potatoes and blankets. This wasn't just transportation. It was a sustainable supply chain powered entirely by human energy and local resources. The secret to these systems' longevity lay in their reciprocity. Silk Road cities didn't tax caravans into oblivion, they competed to offer the best services, knowing thriving trade meant prosperity for all. The Incas required communities near roads to maintain them as part of their Mita labor system, but in return, the state provided security and stored surplus food for lean years. Compare that to modern highways where maintenance often lags until potholes appear. These ancient networks understood something we're relearning. True sustainability isn't about extraction, it's about mutual benefit. Today, as we grapple with supply chain crises and carbon-heavy logistics, these old roads offer unexpected lessons. Mongolian herders still use camel caravans for remote deliveries, avoiding fuel costs and road damage. Engineers study Inca terrace techniques to stabilize modern highways in landslide-prone areas. The brilliance of these systems wasn't just their scale, it was their resilience. When a bridge collapsed on the Silk Road, locals rebuilt it within days using traditional materials. When mudslides buried an Inca road, alternate routes already existed. They didn't just build infrastructure, they wove safety nets into the very fabric of their networks. Perhaps the most poignant legacy lies in what these routes left behind. Unlike today's shipping containers littering ocean floors, the Silk Road's camel dung fertilized desert oases, and Inca runners left nothing but footprints. Their version of global trade didn't just move goods, it enriched the land it crossed. In an age of frantic overnight deliveries and disposable packaging, that's a rhythm worth rediscovering. The Minoan civilization didn't just survive volcanic eruptions, they thrived because of them. When Thura's cataclysmic explosion buried their port city of Akrotiri in meters of ash around 1600 BC, they didn't abandon the Aegean. Instead, they adapted, rebuilding with lighter timber frames that could flex during tremors and painting their walls with swirling motifs of the sea, a psychological anchor in unstable times. Archaeologists found their storerooms stocked with emergency supplies, their multi-story buildings reinforced with earthquake-resistant rubble masonry. This wasn't mere reconstruction, it was resilience engineered into daily life. They even relocated their capital to Knossos, positioning it strategically inland yet connected to the sea, hedging their bets against future disasters while maintaining trade routes. Meanwhile, in China's seismic zones, craftsmen were perfecting a different kind of defense. The Yingxian wooden pagoda, towering 67 meters tall, has weathered 40 earthquakes over 9 centuries without collapsing, including one in 1626 that leveled nearby brick structures. Its secret, a flexible dugong bracket system, interlocking wooden joints that act like shock absorbers, allowing the structure to sway without breaking. Builders intentionally left gaps between components, giving them room to shift during tremors before settling back into place. Even the pagoda's foundation wasn't anchored deep into the earth but sat on a shallow stone base, allowing the whole structure to slide slightly during quakes, a technique modern engineers call base isolation, now used in skyscrapers from Tokyo to San Francisco. What united these cultures was their refusal to see disasters as anomalies. The Minoans designed their cities with open spaces that could serve as emergency gathering points, while Chinese builders incorporated symbolic elements like swinging pendulums in temple roofs to visually monitor ground movement. Both civilizations treated preparedness as cultural practice, not panic response. Annual festivals in Crete included earthquake drills disguised as dances, and Chinese children played with wooden puzzle toys that taught the principles of flexible joinery. Today, as climate change amplifies natural disasters, these ancient strategies are experiencing a renaissance. Architects in California study pagoda designs for wildfire-resistant homes, while Japan's disaster response teams adopt Minoan-style decentralized food storage. The deepest lesson isn't about specific techniques, it's about mindset. These civilizations didn't just endure nature's fury, they learned its rhythms, turning vulnerability into an art form. When modern engineers praise resilient infrastructure, they're echoing a truth these ancients knew. Survival isn't about building stronger walls, but designing systems that bend without breaking. The Dogon people of Mali didn't just watch the stars, they listened to them. For centuries, their farmers planted millet and sorghum not by almanacs or weather forecasts, but by the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. When Sirius appeared just before dawn, a celestial event marking the onset of rains, they knew it was time to sow seeds. This wasn't blind tradition, it was precision astronomy disguised as folklore. The Dogon understood something modern agronomists are only now validating. Celestial patterns often correlate with terrestrial cycles, offering a reliable clock for planting and harvesting. Their knowledge of Sirius's 50-year orbital cycle around its invisible companion star, a fact Western astronomers didn't confirm until the 19th century, hints at an observational science refined over generations. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia's Fertile Crescent, Babylonian priests tracked Venus like a divine stopwatch. Their cuneiform tablets, some dating back to 1700 BCE, record the planet's movements with astonishing accuracy, linking its appearances to optimal dates for barley planting. They noticed something subtle yet profound. When Venus shone brightest in the evening sky during certain seasons, the following harvests were consistently abundant. This wasn't mysticism, it was early data science. By correlating planetary positions with crop yields across decades, they created predictive models that guided an empire's food supply. The brilliance of these systems lay in their holistic vision. The Maya didn't just observe Venus for agriculture, they integrated it into a grand celestial calendar that synchronized corn planting with the planet's 8-year cycle. Their sacred text, the Dresden Codex, contains tables predicting Venus's position centuries in advance, ensuring priests could announce planting ceremonies at exactly the right moment. Similarly, Polynesian navigators used the Pleiades cluster's first autumn appearance to signal the start of yam cultivation, while ancient Greeks timed olive harvests by the position of Arcturus. What modern agriculture often dismisses as superstition reveals itself as sophisticated phenology, the study of cyclic natural events. Research now shows that these celestial markers frequently align with microclimatic shifts invisible to short-term observation. The Dogon's Sirius-based calendar, for instance, anticipates West Africa's monsoon patterns more reliably than early-season rainfall measurements. Similarly, the Maori's Matariki Pleiades New Year signals soil temperature thresholds ideal for root crops, a nuance conventional farming calendars miss. Today, as climate change disrupts traditional growing seasons, some farmers are returning to these cosmic cues. Vineyards in Portugal now time grape harvests using lunar phases, finding sugar content peaks during waning moons, a practice documented in Roman agricultural manuals. In Peru, Andean communities have revived Inca star-based planting guides to adapt to erratic rainfall. Even NASA has studied Navajo moon phase agriculture for insights into sustainable crop rotations. The lesson isn't about abandoning satellites for star charts, it's about recognizing that the best agricultural systems marry cutting-edge technology with timeless wisdom. When a Senegalese millet farmer checks Sirius's position while also accessing soil moisture data via smartphone, they're not choosing between past and future. They're embodying what these ancient cultures knew instinctively, that the sky and earth speak in a language deeper than any single science can translate alone. The towering Moai statues of Easter Island stand as silent witnesses to one of history's starkest warnings. When Polynesian settlers first arrived around 1200 AD, the island was a lush paradise thick with palm forests. These trees weren't just scenery, they were lifeblood, providing wood for fishing canoes, shelter, and tools to move the iconic stone figures. But as the population grew, the forest shrank. With each generation, more trees fell to transport statues or clear farmland until the last palm was cut. The consequences cascaded. Without timber for boats, fishing collapsed. Soil erosion from deforestation crippled agriculture. Within centuries, a thriving society disintegrated into warfare and famine, its people reduced to scraping sustenance from barren ground. What's chilling isn't just the ecological collapse, it's how clearly the islanders saw it coming. Archaeologists found ancient palm nuts gnawed by rats in desperation, and petroglyphs pleading for the gods to return the trees. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia's Fertile Cradle, a slower but equally devastating unraveling was underway. The Sumerians had turned desert into breadbasket with their ingenious irrigation canals, but their success contained the seeds of downfall. As water evaporated under the relentless sun, it left behind salt, a white crust slowly poisoning the soil. Crop yields plummeted by nearly 2/3 over 3 centuries, with tablets lamenting, "The earth turned white." Farmers switched from wheat to more salt-tolerant barley, then to barely anything at all. The very system that birthed civilization, large-scale agriculture, became its undoing. Unlike Easter Island's abrupt crash, Suma's decline played out over generations. Its cities gradually abandoned as the land grew too barren even for weeds. These stories share a haunting pattern. Civilizations at their peak, leveraging nature's bounty with unmatched skill, yet failing to recognize the tipping point where exploitation becomes extinction. The Maya overcut forests to burn limestone for plaster, worsening droughts. The ancestral Pueblones depleted pinyon pines for fuel until their canyon homes became uninhabitable. Even the Romans poisoned their own aqueducts with lead pipes, ignoring warnings from engineers who noted the health effects. Yet buried in these collapses are glimmers of hope, societies that pulled back from the brink. In Japan's Edo period, villages enforced strict forestry laws after devastating clear-cutting, planting cedar groves still harvested sustainably today. The Inca's terraces prevented soil depletion for centuries by mimicking natural contours. These exceptions reveal a profound truth: collapse isn't inevitable. It's the result of choices: to ignore feedback, to prioritize short-term gains, to believe resources are infinite. What makes these ancient failures so urgent isn't their remoteness, but their familiarity. We face our own version of Easter Island's last tree and Suma's salted fields, vanishing aquifers, melting glaciers, dying oceans. The difference is we have their stories. Their ruins aren't just relics, they're guideposts etched with a message as clear as the Moi's hollow eyes. Civilizations thrive when they listen to the land and fall when they stop. Roman concrete doesn't just withstand time, it defies it. While modern bridges and highways crumble after decades, the piers of ancient Austria still stand strong after 2,000 years, submerged in saltwater that should have eaten them alive. The secret: volcanic ash. When Roman engineers mixed lime with ash from Mount Vesuvius, they created a chemical reaction that forms rare minerals like aluminous tobamorite. These crystals grow when water seeps into cracks, effectively knitting the concrete back together. Modern scientists only cracked this code in 2023, discovering that the Romans had essentially invented self-healing infrastructure. Now, researchers are racing to replicate this recipe, blending volcanic rock with industrial byproducts to create green concrete that could reduce global carbon emissions by up to 8%. Imagine a world where potholes seal themselves and seawalls regenerate, all thanks to a 2-millennia-old innovation we're just beginning to understand. Equally astonishing are the Inca's stone walls in Cusco, where massive boulders fit together so precisely, not even a razor blade can slip between them. These aren't just artistic marvels, they're seismic survival kits. During earthquakes, the stones dance, shifting slightly before settling back into place, while modern buildings around them collapse. The Incas achieved this by shaping each stone with slight convexities, creating interlocking bumps that distribute shock waves like a puzzle absorbing a punch. Japanese engineers facing similar quake risks have begun incorporating this living masonry technique into skyscrapers, using flexible joints inspired by Inca designs. The irony, we're spending billions on high-tech damping systems when the solution might lie in stones carved by hand 600 years ago. But the real game changers aren't just these individual technologies, it's the philosophy behind them. Ancient builders worked with nature's constraints rather than against them. The Romans used seawater to strengthen concrete. We fight corrosion with toxic sealants. The Incas built with stones that move with the earth. We pour rigid foundations that snap under pressure. This shift in thinking is already transforming fields beyond construction. Persian windcatchers are inspiring zero-energy cooling systems in Dubai's skyscrapers, while Aztec chinampas, those floating gardens, are being adapted to combat urban food deserts with aquaponic farms on city waterways. The most exciting developments are happening where old and new collide. At MIT, researchers are embedding Roman-inspired self-healing bacteria in concrete, while in Peru, engineers are 3D scanning Inca walls to create digital models for quake-resistant architecture. These aren't nostalgic recreations, they're upgrades, combining ancient wisdom with cutting-edge science. The past isn't just offering us tools, it's offering us a roadmap for resilience. As climate change and resource scarcity escalate, the civilizations that thrived for centuries without fossil fuels or microchips might hold more relevant solutions than any futuristic tech we could invent. Their greatest innovation wasn't any single technique. It was the mindset that saw every challenge as an invitation to collaborate with the world rather than conquer it. Long before environmental treaties or national parks, stories guarded the Earth's balance. Aboriginal Dreamtime narratives didn't just explain creation, they mapped an unbreakable covenant between people and land. Take the Woggle, a serpent spirit in Noongar lore whose winding paths trace Australia's river systems. These stories weren't myths in the modern sense, they were ecological contracts. By teaching that disturbing the Woggle's resting places would dry up waterways, elders encoded watershed protection into sacred law. Violating these rules wasn't just taboo, it was unthinkable, a rupture in the cosmic order. The result, springs that flowed uninterrupted for 60,000 years, until colonial agriculture disrupted their rhythms. Halfway across the world, the Maori's tale of Tain Mahuta tells of the forest god who separated earth and sky to let light nourish his children, the trees. This wasn't merely poetry. It established a kinship framework where cutting down a mature quarry required rituals acknowledging the tree's lineage. Modern forestry studies now confirm what these stories knew. Old-growth quarry roots act as fungal networks, nourishing saplings. The Maori practice of leaving mother trees wasn't superstition. It was sophisticated arboreal stewardship disguised as legend. What's revolutionary about these narrative systems is their enforcement mechanism. Unlike modern environmental laws that rely on penalties, these stories wove compliance into identity. The Hopi story of the Blue Star Kachina, for instance, isn't just a prophecy, it's a moral compass. It teaches that when disrespect for nature reaches a tipping point, the Kachina will return to purify the world. such narratives don't threaten punishment. They evoke visceral dread of becoming the people who made the Kachina come. Now consider the Three Sisters legend shared by many Native American nations. Corn, beans, and squash are described as siblings who thrive together. Corn stalks supporting bean vines, squash leaves shading soil to retain moisture. For centuries, this story preserved companion planting traditions that modern agronomy now praises for nitrogen fixation and pest control. The genius lies in how the tale makes scientific interdependence feel sacred. You wouldn't separate sisters just as you wouldn't monocrop. Today, as biodiversity plummets, some conservationists are turning back to these narrative tools. In the Amazon, the Satare-Mawe people use origin stories about warrior wasps to protect pollinator habitats. Australian rangers blend Dreamtime maps with GPS to restore sacred sites. These aren't nostalgic gestures, they're recognition that data alone can't spark the emotional connection needed for lasting change. A spreadsheet about watershed depletion might inform, but a story about the Woggles' grief moves. The challenge isn't to copy these tales verbatim, but to rediscover their underlying power. Modern equivalents exist. Japan's forest bathing concept reframes ecosystem services as sensory therapy, while Nordic friluftsliv laws codify nature access as cultural right. What if climate reports came not just with graphs, but with parables about ice sheet spirits or methane dragon slayers? The oldest environmental wisdom suggests that to protect something, you must first make it beloved. And nothing does that better than a story worth passing down. From the pyramids aligned with celestial movements to the self-healing concrete of Rome, ancient civilizations didn't just build, they listened. Every stone they placed, every canal they dug, was part of a conversation with the natural world, a dialogue modern society has all but forgotten. Take Bali's Subak system, where water temples and rice paddies exist in sacred harmony, or the Dogon farmers who read the stars like an agricultural almanac. These weren't just clever tricks, they were lifelines forged through generations of observation, adaptation, and reverence. What's humbling is how these solutions emerged from constraints. The Aztecs, surrounded by swamps, didn't drain them, they built floating gardens. The Inca, faced with vertiginous slopes, didn't flatten mountains, they sculpted them into terraces. Even the Polynesians, adrift on the vast Pacific, didn't fight the ocean, they learned its language, turning currents and bird flights into a navigational compass. Their innovations didn't just solve problems, they celebrated limitations, proving that scarcity can birth genius when approached with creativity rather than force. But here's the urgent truth. Their wisdom isn't just historical curiosity, it's a survival manual for our time. As megacities sink into rising seas and wildfires rage through deforested lands, we're relearning what these cultures never forgot. Dutch engineers now mimic Venice's floating foundations, while architects in Dubai install windcatchers to cool skyscrapers without AC. The Mayas' drought-resistant reservoirs inspire modern water conservation, and the Inuits' fermented preservation techniques inform zero-waste kitchens. The past isn't offering us nostalgia, it's handing us tools, yet the real lesson isn't about copying ancient blueprints, it's about adopting their mindset. These civilizations thrived because they saw themselves as part of nature's web, not its masters. They didn't just ask, how can we take? They asked, how can we give back? When Roman concrete healed itself or Balinese farmers made irrigation a sacred duty, they weren't just engineering solutions, they were honoring a covenant with the earth. So as you scroll past ruins in history books or walk through cities built on buried rivers, pause and listen. The stones whisper secrets we desperately need to hear. Hit like if you're ready to see the past not as a graveyard of forgotten ideas, but as a living library. Subscribe to keep exploring these untold stories and drop a comment below. Which ancient innovation could revolutionize our world today? The conversation between past and future starts with you.